Do you remember how American homes smelled in 1965? Probably not, because the chemicals you grew up with, the mothballs, the ammonia, they all disappeared. Let's discover these chemicals, which are common in every home in 1965. DDT was the miracle insecticide of the post-war era, sprayed liberally in every American home. Aerosol cans sat under kitchen sinks, in linen closets, and on garage shelves. Mothers sprayed it directly on countertops, into closets, around windows, and over beds to kill flies, mosquitoes, ants, and roaches. The white mist settled on dishes, toys, and food. Children played in rooms freshly fogged with DDT, and nobody worried. By 1965, scientists had documented DDT's persistence in human fat tissue, breast milk, and the environment. The chemical didn't break down, it accumulated. Birds were dying, eggshells thinning, and apex predators were collapsing. In 1965, the first residential indoor use restrictions began, limiting household aerosol formulations. But DDT didn't vanish overnight. It lingered in cabinets, basements, and bodies for years. The miracle spray that promised a bug-free home delivered a toxic legacy instead. Chlordane was the go-to chemical for termite control, applied directly to home foundations, crawl spaces, and basements. Pest control companies pumped gallons of Chlordane into the soil beneath houses, where it was supposed to create an invisible barrier against termites. But Chlordane didn't stay in the soil. It vaporized into indoor air, seeping through cracks in concrete and floorboards. Families unknowingly breathed Chlordane fumes for years after treatment. The chemical was persistent, toxic, and fat-soluble, accumulating in human tissues. By 1965, exposure warnings for homes were issued after studies linked Chlordane to liver damage, neurological effects, and cancer in laboratory animals. Despite the warnings, Chlordane remained in use for decades, with full bans not enacted until 1988. Homes treated in the 1960s still contain detectable Chlordane residues today. The foundation meant to protect your home slowly poisoned everyone inside it. Heptachlor was marketed as a versatile pesticide for lawns, gardens, and household pests. Homeowners spread it on grass to kill grubs, sprinkled it in vegetable gardens, and applied it indoors for ant and roach control. It was cheap, effective, and widely available at hardware stores. But Heptachlor was also a potent neurotoxin and suspected carcinogen. Like other organochlorine pesticides, it persisted in soil and fat tissue, bioaccumulating through the food chain. By 1965, initial residential restrictions were implemented after studies showed Heptachlor's toxic metabolite, heptachlor epoxide, in human milk and fat samples. The chemical didn't degrade. It converted into an even more toxic form and stayed in the environment for decades. Families who used Heptachlor in their gardens unknowingly contaminated their soil, water, and bodies. The product promised a perfect lawn, but delivered a carcinogenic residue that lasted generations. Carbon tetrachloride was the standard solvent in household spot removers, dry cleaning fluids, and degreasers. It removed grease stains, ink, and oil from clothing, upholstery, and carpets with impressive efficiency. Housewives kept bottles under the sink, using it regularly for laundry and cleaning. But carbon tetrachloride was also a potent liver toxin and suspected carcinogen. Exposure through inhalation or skin contact caused dizziness, nausea, liver damage, and in severe cases, liver failure. The vapors were heavier than air, sinking into basements and poorly ventilated spaces where they lingered for hours. By 1965, consumer exposure warnings were issued, but the chemical remained in many products for years. People continued using carbon tetrachloride-based cleaners, unaware they were inhaling a poison with every stain removal. The miracle solvent that made fabrics spotless left invisible damage in livers and kidneys. Chloroform wasn't just an anesthetic in old movies. It was a common solvent in household cleaners, aerosol products, and even food processing. Trace amounts appeared in toothpaste, cough syrups, and mouthwashes. It was used to extract flavors and fats in commercial food production and as a solvent in furniture, polishes, and spot removers. Chloroform had a sweet, distinctive odor that lingered in kitchens and bathrooms. But chronic exposure caused liver and kidney damage, and studies in the 1960s linked it to cancer in laboratory animals. In 1965, household use restrictions began, limiting chloroform in consumer products. The FDA started phasing it out of food processing, though trace contamination persisted for years. Families had been breathing chloroform fumes from everyday products, unaware that the sweet smell was a warning of danger. The solvent used to clean your home was quietly destroying your organs. 5 chemicals down, and a pattern emerges. Pesticides in every closet, solvents under every sink, poisons in every cleaning bottle. These weren't industrial accidents. They were household staples, sprayed, poured, and trusted daily. But 1965 was just the beginning. 4 more chemicals from that year remain. Benzene was a ubiquitous solvent in paint removers, degreasers, rubber cements, and adhesives. It had a sweet, aromatic odor that filled garages, workshops, and basements whenever someone used it. Mechanics cleaned engine parts with benzene. Hobbyists used it to thin paints and dissolve adhesives. Homeowners kept cans of benzene-based products in their sheds for various cleaning tasks. But benzene was also a known carcinogen that caused leukemia and bone marrow damage. Even brief exposure to benzene vapors suppressed immune function and damaged blood cells. By 1965, consumer product limits were introduced, restricting benzene content in household EAS. But enforcement was slow, and many products remained on shelves for years. Workers and hobbyists continued using benzene-based cleaners, unaware they were inhaling a blood poison. The solvent that cleaned engines so effectively was destroying the blood of everyone who used it. Phenylmercuric acetate and related mercury compounds were standard ingredients in latex paints, wallpaper pastes, and household disinfectants. They prevented mold and bacterial growth, extending the shelf life of paints and preventing mildew on walls. Every freshly painted room released mercury vapors for weeks. Disinfectants containing phenylmercuric compounds were used to clean bathrooms, kitchens, and nurseries. Mercury was considered safe in small amounts, a preservative that protected homes from decay. But mercury is a neurotoxin that bioaccumulates in tissues, causing tremors, cognitive impairment, and kidney damage. By 1965, mercury exposure restrictions in homes were implemented after studies documented mercury poisoning from household products. But phenylmercuric compounds remained in paints and disinfectants for years. Families who painted their children's bedrooms unknowingly exposed them to mercury vapors. The paint meant to brighten and protect your walls slowly poisoned your nervous system. Arsenic-based pesticides were common household products for killing rats, ants, and roaches. Powders and sprays containing arsenic trioxide or sodium arsenate were sold at hardware stores and applied liberally in basements, attics, and crawl spaces. Homeowners spread arsenic powders along baseboards and under sinks, believing it was a safe and effective pest control method. But arsenic is one of the most toxic elements, causing cancer, cardiovascular disease, and neurological damage with chronic exposure. Children and pets were particularly vulnerable as arsenic residues persisted on floors and surfaces. By 1965, residential use limits were applied, restricting arsenic concentrations in consumer products. But enforcement was inconsistent, and many households continued using old stocks of arsenic-based pesticides for years. The poison meant to protect your home from pests was silently poisoning your family instead. Lead arsenate was a dual-toxin pesticide combining lead and arsenic, widely used in agriculture and home gardens. Residues accumulated on fruits, vegetables, and surfaces, persisting long after application. Homeowners used lead arsenate in gardens, and children played in treated yards where residues lingered in soil. The pesticide was tracked indoors on shoes, contaminating floors and carpets. Lead arsenate dust settled on windowsills, toys, and furniture. Both lead and arsenic are cumulative poisons. Lead damages the nervous system and impairs cognitive development, while arsenic causes cancer and organ damage. By 1965, restrictions on residential exposure were enforced, limiting lead arsenate use in home applications. But the contamination persisted. Homes with treated gardens and orchards retained lead and arsenic residues in soil for decades. The pesticide meant to grow healthy produce left a legacy of neurological and carcinogenic damage. Saffrole was the natural flavoring compound in sassafras root, giving root beer and sassafras tea their distinctive taste. For generations, families brewed sassafras tea and enjoyed root beer flavored with real sassafras extract. It was an iconic American flavor, trusted and beloved. But in 1960, the FDA banned saffrole and sassafras oil in food after studies showed it caused liver cancer in laboratory animals. The chemical was carcinogenic, and no safe level of consumption could be established. Root beer manufacturers reformulated their recipes, replacing natural sassafras with artificial flavors. Ammonia was the workhorse of every American household in 1965. Clear, pungent, and effective, it cleaned windows, floors, countertops, and bathrooms with ruthless efficiency. The sharp, acrid smell was unmistakable. It burned the nostrils and throat, a stinging warning that something powerful was at work. Housewives mixed ammonia with water in buckets, mopped floors until they gleamed, and wiped windows until they were streak-free. The fumes filled kitchens and bathrooms, lingering for hours even with windows open. Ammonia was cheap, available at every grocery store, and trusted as a safe, natural cleaning agent because it evaporated quickly and left no residue. Chlorine bleach was America's miracle disinfectant. Clorox was in every laundry room, under every kitchen sink, and in every bathroom cabinet. It whitened clothes, disinfected surfaces, sanitized cutting boards, and killed germs with unmatched effectiveness. The sharp, chemical odor was overwhelming, a chlorinated swimming pool smell that clung to fabrics, skin, and air. Pouring bleach into washing machines released clouds of chlorine fumes. Scrubbing bathroom tiles with bleach-soaked sponges filled small rooms with eye-watering vapors. The smell was so pervasive that it became synonymous with cleanliness itself. Pine Sol was the scent of a freshly mopped floor. Introduced in 1929, it became a household staple by the 1960s, trusted for its powerful cleaning action and distinctive pine fragrance. The thick, amber liquid was diluted in buckets of water and mopped across linoleum, tile, and hardwood floors. The smell was overwhelming, sharp, resinous, and unmistakably piney, lingering for hours after cleaning. Families associated the scent with cleanliness, order, and hygiene. A pine sol-cleaned floor wasn't just clean, it smelled clean. Lysol was the ultimate household disinfectant. The aerosol can sat on bathroom shelves, kitchen counters, and in linen closets, ready to be sprayed on any surface that needed sanitizing. The smell was harsh and medicinal, phenolic compounds mixed with solvents and propellants, creating a chemical fog that filled rooms. Families sprayed Lysol on toilet seats, doorknobs, countertops, and even in the air to disinfect rooms after illness. The mist settled on surfaces and lingered in the air, a chemical veil that promised to kill germs and protect families from disease. The distinctive odor became synonymous with cleanliness and hygiene, a reassuring smell that meant protection from invisible threats. But Lysol contained phenols and cresols, toxic chemicals that irritated respiratory systems, skin, and eyes. Inhaling Lysol spray caused coughing, throat irritation, and breathing difficulties. The fine aerosol mist penetrated deep into lungs, depositing phenolic compounds directly into delicate lung tissue. Prolonged exposure was linked to liver and kidney damage. Pets were particularly vulnerable. Cats exposed to phenolic disinfectants suffered severe poisoning and organ failure because they lacked the enzymes necessary to metabolize phenols. Dogs experienced vomiting, tremors, and neurological symptoms after exposure. Despite these dangers, Lysol was marketed as safe for homes, even around children and pets. The product's warnings were vague, and its advertising emphasized germ-killing power over safety concerns. Mothers sprayed Lysol in nurseries, on baby-changing tables, and in children's rooms, believing they were protecting their families. The reality was different. Every spray released a cloud of phenolic toxins that irritated airways. Mothballs were ubiquitous in 1965. Every closet, dresser drawer, and storage chest contained white, pungent balls of naphthalene or paradichlorobenzene, intended to protect wool clothing and linens from moth larvae. The smell was overpowering, sharp, chemical, and unmistakable, permeating fabrics and filling entire rooms. Clothing stored with mothballs retained the odor for months, even after washing. The scent was so common that it became a cultural marker. Grandma's closet always smelled like mothballs. Families accepted the odor as a necessary protection against expensive clothing damage, never questioning what the smell meant for their health. But naphthalene was a toxic chemical and a suspected carcinogen. Inhaling mothball vapors caused headaches, nausea, dizziness, and respiratory irritation. Prolonged exposure damaged red blood cells, causing hemolytic anemia, particularly in children and people with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase (G6PD) deficiency. Naphthalene was especially dangerous to infants whose immature enzyme systems couldn't metabolize the chemical effectively. The vapors didn't just repel moths, they penetrated deep into lung tissue and absorbed into the bloodstream. Accidental ingestion by children who mistook mothballs for candy led to poisoning, vomiting, seizures, and organ damage. Emergency rooms treated mothball poisonings regularly, many resulting in permanent neurological damage or death. Despite these risks, mothballs were considered a household necessity. Parents placed them in children's closets, unaware that the fumes were harmful. 15 ingredients down, cleaners that burned throats, disinfectants that poisoned pets, pine oil that damaged lungs, bleach that created toxic gas, mothballs that destroyed blood cells. Every smell meant safety. Every smell meant danger. The chemicals that promised protection were the ones causing harm. 5 more remain. Paradichlorobenzene was the alternative to naphthalene mothballs, marketed as safer and less toxic, but equally dangerous. Moth crystals were scattered in closets, placed in sachets, and hung in garment bags to repel moths and protect wool clothing. The odor was similar to naphthalene, but slightly sweeter, still sharp and chemical. Families who found naphthalene's smell intolerable switched to paradichlorobenzene, believing it was a safer option. It wasn't. The crystals were white and crystalline, resembling rock candy, which made them particularly dangerous around children who might mistake them for treats. Paradichlorobenzene was also a suspected carcinogen and liver toxin. The EPA later classified it as a possible human carcinogen based on animal studies showing kidney and liver tumors. Chronic inhalation caused dizziness, headaches, nausea, and eye irritation. Like naphthalene, paradichlorobenzene sublimed into vapors that saturated clothing and filled enclosed spaces. Long-term exposure contributed to blood disorders and immune system dysfunction. But paradichlorobenzene was widely used throughout the 1960s and beyond, trusted as a household staple. The chemical industry marketed it as a modern improvement over older naphthalene products, emphasizing its pleasant odor and effectiveness. Families used moth crystals in linen closets, storage trunks, and seasonal clothing boxes, unaware of the long-term health risks. The crystals slowly evaporated, releasing toxic fumes that everyone in the home inhaled daily. Borax was an essential laundry room. The white powder was added to washing machines to boost detergent power, soften water, and brighten whites. It had a faint, almost odorless smell, but its presence was unmistakable in every load of laundry. Borax was natural, mined from the earth, and marketed as safe for families. Advertisements showed smiling mothers adding borax to laundry, confident in its cleaning power and safety. The famous 20-Mule Team Borax brand became synonymous with clean, fresh laundry. But borax, sodium borate, was also a skin irritant, respiratory irritant, and potential reproductive toxin. Handling borax powder caused skin rashes and eye irritation. Inhaling borax dust during scooping and pouring irritated airways and lungs. More concerning, studies later linked borate exposure to reproductive harm and developmental effects in laboratory animals. Chronic exposure affected hormone levels and fertility. Despite these risks, borax was considered safe because it was natural. Families used it liberally in laundry, hand washing, and even as a household cleaner. Some parents made homemade slime with borax for children to play with, unaware of the skin irritation and ingestion risks. The powder that promised whiter, brighter laundry was exposing families to a reproductive toxin. Residues remained on clothing, bedding, and towels in constant contact with skin. The product, marketed as safe and natural, was quietly irritating skin, damaging airways, and potentially affecting reproductive health. The powder that meant cleanliness meant toxic exposure. The scent of fresh laundry was tainted by a chemical that harmed the body. Lye-based drain cleaners like Drano were the nuclear option for clogged sinks and tubs. When hair, grease, and soap scum blocked drains, families reached for the can of Drano and poured the caustic crystals or liquid down the drain. The chemical reaction was immediate and violent, heat, bubbling, and acrid fumes rising from the drain. The smell was sharp, chemical, and unmistakable, a warning that something extremely corrosive was at work. The fumes irritated eyes, noses, and throats, but the product worked. Clogs dissolved, and water flowed again. Homeowners accepted the discomfort as a necessary trade-off for functional plumbing. The immediate results convinced families that Drano was indispensable despite the obvious dangers. But lye, sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide, was one of the most dangerous household chemicals. It was highly caustic, burning skin, eyes, and mucous membranes on contact. Splashes caused immediate chemical burns that deepened over hours, destroying tissue layer by layer. Inhaling fumes led to respiratory damage, throat burns, and long-term airway scarring that caused chronic breathing problems. Accidental ingestion, tragically common among curious children, caused catastrophic injuries. Esophageal burns, stomach perforation, and lifelong damage to the digestive tract requiring multiple surgeries and permanent feeding tubes. Even careful use carried risks. Fumes from the chemical reaction irritated airways and could trigger severe asthma attacks. Spills on skin or surfaces caused severe burns that required immediate medical treatment. Despite clear dangers, Drano was marketed as a household necessity. The caustic cleaner that promised to clear drains was a chemical weapon in disguise. Every use released toxic fumes, risked chemical burns, and endangered children. Comet and Ajax were the go-to scouring powders for stubborn stains and tough cleaning jobs. The blue and white canisters sat on bathroom sinks and kitchen counters, ready to tackle soap scum, hard water stains, and baked-on food. Shaking the powder onto surfaces released a cloud of fine white dust that smelled sharply of chlorine. The abrasive powder was scrubbed with sponges or rags, creating a paste that scoured away grime. The chlorine smell lingered long after rinsing, a testament to the product's cleaning power. Families trusted these powders as essential household staples, using them multiple times per week without questioning their safety. The ritual of scrubbing with Comet or Ajax became synonymous with thorough, effective cleaning. But these scouring powders contained bleach, sodium hypochlorite, and abrasive silica particles. Inhaling the dust irritated lungs and airways, causing coughing and respiratory distress. The fine silica particles were especially dangerous. Chronic inhalation contributed to silicosis, a progressive lung disease caused by silica dust accumulation in lung tissue. Silicosis caused scarring, reduced lung capacity, and increased susceptibility to tuberculosis and lung cancer. The chlorine bleach irritated skin, eyes, and mucous membranes, causing redness, burning, and allergic reactions. Mixing Comet or Ajax with acidic cleaners or ammonia produced toxic chlorine gas or chloramine, leading to chemical poisoning, severe respiratory damage, and in extreme cases, death. Emergency rooms regularly treated victims of accidental chemical mixing. Despite these hazards, scouring powders were used daily in millions of homes. Mothers scrubbed bathtubs, sinks, and countertops, often in poorly ventilated bathrooms, inhaling clouds of chlorinated dust. Children played nearby, exposed to the same toxic fumes. The abrasive action scratched surfaces, embedding silica and bleach residues that leached into food and water. The powders that promised sparkling, clean surfaces were coating homes in respiratory irritants and lung-damaging silica. Turpentine was essential in every garage, workshop, and basement. The strong-smelling solvent was used to thin oil-based paints, clean paintbrushes, and remove stubborn paint stains from hands and surfaces. The odor was unmistakable. Sharp, resinous, and penetrating, with a distinct pine-like aroma that filled rooms and lingered for hours. Turpentine was natural, distilled from pine resin, so families assumed it was safe. Painters, hobbyists, and homeowners used it liberally, often in poorly ventilated spaces, breathing in the fumes without concern. Hardware stores sold turpentine in large cans without safety equipment or protective gear. treating it like any other household product. But turpentine was a volatile organic compound, VOC, and a potent respiratory irritant. Inhaling turpentine vapors caused dizziness, headaches, nausea, confusion, and respiratory irritation. Prolonged exposure damaged the central nervous system, kidneys, and liver. Skin contact caused irritation, dermatitis, and chemical burns. Repeated skin exposure led to painful cracking and weeping lesions. Accidental ingestion, especially by children attracted to the pine scent, led to poisoning, vomiting, chemical pneumonia, and organ damage. Turpentine was also highly flammable, creating fire hazards in homes and workshops. Despite clear dangers, safety warnings were minimal, and protective equipment like gloves or respirators was rarely used. Turpentine was used routinely in enclosed spaces. Fathers cleaned paintbrushes in basements with closed windows. Hobbyists thinned model paints in small rooms without ventilation. Children played nearby, inhaling the neurotoxic fumes that seeped through doorways and vents. The natural origin of turpentine created a false sense of security. If it came from trees, it must be safe. But natural didn't mean harmless. The solvent that cleaned paintbrushes was damaging brains, livers, and kidneys with every inhalation. Chronic exposure accumulated over years, causing permanent neurological damage that manifested as tremors, memory problems, and personality changes. The smell meant creativity, home improvement, and DIY projects, but it also meant neurotoxic exposure. The scent of turpentine was the scent of brain damage, one brushstroke at a time. Mineral spirits was the modern alternative to turpentine, marketed as a safer, odorless paint thinner for cleaning brushes and thinning oil-based paints. By the 1960s, it had largely replaced turpentine in many households because it was cheaper, more refined, and supposedly less irritating. The smell was still strong, a petroleum-based solvent odor that filled garages, workshops, and basements whenever someone painted or cleaned brushes. Fathers used it to clean rollers after painting the garage. Hobbyists thinned model paints with it. DIY enthusiasts kept cans of mineral spirits on workshop shelves, using it regularly without protective equipment or ventilation. Mineral spirits was a petroleum distillate, a mixture of aliphatic and alicyclic hydrocarbons that posed serious health risks. Inhaling the vapors caused dizziness, headaches, nausea, drowsiness, and confusion. Acute exposure led to central nervous system depression, slowed reflexes, impaired coordination, and loss of consciousness in extreme cases. Chronic exposure damaged the nervous system, liver, and kidneys. Skin contact caused irritation, dermatitis, and chemical burns. Prolonged or repeated skin exposure led to defatting of the skin, cracking, and painful lesions. Accidental ingestion caused chemical pneumonia if aspirated into the lungs, a potentially fatal condition. Despite these dangers, mineral spirits was considered safe because it was odorless compared to turpentine. But odorless didn't mean harmless. It simply meant the chemical had been refined to reduce some volatile compounds. The toxic effects remained. Families used mineral spirits in enclosed spaces, basements, garages with closed doors, small workshops without windows, breathing in the fumes for hours while cleaning up after painting projects. Children played in adjacent rooms, exposed to the same vapors that drifted through doorways and vents. The product's safety warnings were minimal, often buried in fine print on the back of cans. Few people wore gloves or respirators. The petroleum solvent that promised easy cleanup was quietly damaging brains, livers, and kidneys. Workers who used mineral spirits daily, painters, mechanics, factory workers, suffered the worst effects: chronic neurological damage, cognitive impairment, and organ dysfunction. But even casual home users faced risks. Every time someone cleaned a paintbrush with mineral spirits, they inhaled neurotoxic fumes. The smell meant productivity, home improvement, and finished projects, but it also meant brain damage. The scent of a freshly painted room was tainted by a solvent that harmed the body with every breath. Floor wax was a weekly ritual in American homes. Johnson Wax, Mop and Glow, and similar products promised shiny, protected floors that gleamed under kitchen lights. The application process filled homes with a distinctive smell, a mixture of waxes, petroleum solvents, and synthetic fragrances that lingered for hours. Mothers poured liquid wax onto linoleum and tile floors, spreading it with mops or rags, then buffing it to a high shine. The process was labor-intensive, requiring hands and knees scrubbing and buffing, often in poorly ventilated spaces. The smell was unmistakable, waxy, chemical, and slightly sweet, a scent that signaled household pride and cleanliness. But floor wax contained petroleum distillates, naphtha, and other volatile organic compounds, VOCs, that posed respiratory and neurological risks. Inhaling the fumes during application caused headaches, dizziness, nausea, and respiratory irritation. The solvents evaporated as the wax dried, releasing a cloud of VOCs into the indoor air. Chronic exposure to these solvents contributed to central nervous system effects, impaired memory, difficulty concentrating, and mood changes. The waxes also contained synthetic fragrances and preservatives that triggered allergic reactions and asthma in sensitive individuals. The process of applying floor wax required prolonged close contact with the chemicals. Mothers knelt on freshly waxed floors, breathing in the fumes at close range. Skin contact with liquid wax caused irritation and dermatitis. The wax residue remained on floors, gradually releasing VOCs over days and weeks as it wore down. Children crawled and played on waxed floors, their faces close to the surface, inhaling residual fumes and absorbing chemicals through their skin. Pets licked their paws after walking on waxed floors, ingesting the chemicals. Despite these hazards, floor waxing was considered essential housekeeping. A shiny floor meant a well-maintained home, a source of pride for homemakers. The advertisements showed smiling women admiring their gleaming floors, never mentioning the chemical exposure involved. The industry marketed floor wax as safe and necessary, emphasizing beauty and protection while downplaying health risks. Families inhaled petroleum solvents and VOCs every week, accumulating chronic exposure that damaged their nervous systems and respiratory health. The floors that gleamed so beautifully were coated in neurotoxic solvents. The smell that meant household pride actually meant chemical poisoning. The ritual that promised cleanliness and beauty was slowly harming everyone who walked, crawled, or played on those shiny, toxic floors. Aquanet was the queen of hairspray in the 1960s. The pink and white can sat on every bathroom counter, used daily to set hairstyles in place with an impenetrable hold. The smell was overwhelming, a chemical cloud of lacquer, propellants, and synthetic fragrances that filled bathrooms and lingered in hair for hours. Women and teenage girls sprayed Aquanet liberally, holding the can inches from their heads and coating their hair in a thick mist. The aerosol fog didn't just settle on hair, it filled the air, coating mirrors, sinks, and walls with a sticky residue. Bathrooms reeked of hairspray, a sickly sweet chemical smell that became synonymous with beauty and grooming rituals. But Aquanet contained dangerous chemicals. The aerosol propellant was chlorofluorocarbon, CFC, a compound that would later be banned for destroying the ozone layer. More immediately concerning, Aquanet contained vinyl chloride, a known human carcinogen, as a propellant from at least 1970 through 1972. Vinyl chloride exposure was linked to liver cancer, specifically angiosarcoma, a rare and deadly cancer. Workers in vinyl chloride plants were dying, and the same chemical was being sprayed directly into the air that families breathed. The hairspray also contained volatile organic compounds, VOCs, synthetic fragrances, and resins that irritated respiratory systems, triggered asthma, and caused allergic reactions. Inhaling Aquanet fumes caused dizziness, headaches, nausea, and throat irritation. Chronic exposure contributed to respiratory problems and long-term lung damage. The fine aerosol particles were small enough to penetrate deep into the lungs, where they deposited chemicals directly into lung tissue. Women who used hairspray daily, sometimes multiple times a day, accumulated significant exposure. Teenage girls, desperate for the perfect bouffant or beehive hairstyle, inhaled even more, spraying in small, poorly ventilated bathrooms with the door closed. The beauty industry marketed Aquanet as essential for modern women. Advertisements showed glamorous women with perfect hair, never mentioning the carcinogenic propellants or respiratory risks. The sticky residue that coated bathroom surfaces was the same residue coating the inside of lungs. The product that promised beauty and confidence was delivering cancer-causing chemicals with every spray. The smell meant style, femininity, and perfection, but it also meant carcinogenic exposure. The aerosol that held hair in place was quietly poisoning everyone who breathed it. The scent of beauty was the scent of cancer, one spray at a time. Brylcreem was the grooming standard for men in the 1960s. "A little dab'll do ya," the famous slogan promised, but most men used far more than a dab. The thick, oily pomade smelled distinctly masculine, a mixture of mineral oil, beeswax, and synthetic fragrances that clung to hair, pillows, shirt collars, and hands. Fathers applied Brylcreem every morning, combing it through their hair to achieve the slicked-back, shiny look that defined mid-century masculinity. The smell was everywhere, in bathrooms, bedrooms, cars, and offices. Men's hair gleamed with oil, leaving greasy stains on headrests and pillowcases. Brylcreem's main ingredient was mineral oil, a petroleum byproduct that coated hair and scalp. While mineral oil itself was considered relatively inert, it contained impurities and contaminants, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, some of which were carcinogenic. The synthetic fragrances in Brylcreem were poorly regulated and often contained phthalates, chemicals linked to endocrine disruption, reproductive harm, and developmental effects. Phthalates were used to make fragrances last longer, but they were absorbed through the skin and inhaled with every application. Daily use of Brylcreem meant chronic exposure to these chemicals. The pomade coated the scalp, where it was absorbed through skin. It transferred to hands during application, then to food when men ate without washing thoroughly. It rubbed off on pillowcases, where men slept with their faces pressed against the oily residue for 8 hours every night. Wives and children were exposed through secondary contact, hugs, kisses, shared furniture, and contaminated laundry. The grooming industry marketed Brylcreem as essential for professional appearance and social success. Advertisements featured confident, well-groomed men, implying that Brylcreem was the key to success and attractiveness. The product's safety was never questioned. It was just hair pomade, a harmless grooming aid. But the daily ritual of applying Brylcreem meant daily exposure to petroleum byproducts, potential carcinogens, and endocrine disruptors. The oil that made hair shine was coating scalps in questionable chemicals. The smell meant masculinity, professionalism, and grooming standards. But it also meant chemical exposure. The pomade that promised confidence and style was delivering phthalates and petroleum contaminants. The scent of a well-groomed man was tainted by the industrial byproducts slicked into his hair every morning. Old Spice was the definitive masculine scent of the 1960s. The iconic white bottle with the ship logo sat on every bathroom counter used by fathers and sons after shaving. The smell was unmistakable, spicy, musky, and masculine, a blend of cinnamon, clove, and citrus notes mixed with alcohol and synthetic musks. Slapping Old Spice onto freshly shaved skin was a daily ritual, a rite of passage for boys becoming men. The scent lingered for hours, announcing a man's presence before he entered a room. It was the smell of masculinity, confidence, and tradition. But Old Spice contained high concentrations of alcohol, typically 70–80% ethanol, used as a solvent and preservative. Slapping alcohol-based aftershave onto freshly shaved skin caused an immediate stinging sensation, but the alcohol also dried and irritated skin, stripping away natural oils and disrupting the skin barrier. Repeated use led to chronic dryness, flaking, and dermatitis. The high alcohol content also meant that Old Spice was flammable, posing fire risks in homes and bathrooms. More concerning were the synthetic fragrance compounds. Old Spice's signature scent relied on dozens of undisclosed chemicals, phthalates used as fixatives, synthetic musks that persisted in the body, and allergens that triggered reactions in sensitive individuals. Phthalates were endocrine disruptors, interfering with testosterone and reproductive hormones. Synthetic musks, particularly musk ketone and musk xylene, bioaccumulated in fat tissue and were detected in human breast milk and blood samples. These compounds were poorly tested and largely unregulated in the 1960s. The fragrance also contained potential allergens like eugenol, geraniol, and limonene, natural compounds that caused contact allergies and skin sensitization in susceptible individuals. Men who used Old Spice daily absorbed these chemicals through their skin. Family members inhaled the fragrance compounds which volatilized into the air. Wives and children were exposed through close contact, hugs, kisses, and shared living spaces. The grooming industry marketed Old Spice as a timeless tradition, a symbol of masculinity passed from father to son. Advertisements emphasized confidence, strength, and heritage, never mentioning chemical exposure or health risks. The aftershave that promised to soothe and refresh shaved skin was actually irritating it with alcohol and coating it with endocrine disruptors. The smell meant tradition, masculinity, and grooming rituals, but it also meant phthalate exposure and synthetic musks. The scent of Old Spice was the scent of unregulated fragrance chemicals, absorbed through skin and inhaled by entire families. Aqua Velva was Old Spice's cooler, mintier rival. The distinctive ice blue bottle contained an alcohol-based aftershave with a sharp, mentholated scent that provided an intense cooling sensation on freshly shaved skin. The slogan, "There's something about an Aqua Velva man," promised attractiveness and confidence. Men splashed it generously after shaving, wincing at the alcohol burn followed by the icy menthol tingle. The smell was bracing and medicinal, minty, clean, and unmistakably masculine. It filled bathrooms and lingered on skin, announcing a man's grooming routine to everyone nearby. Like Old Spice, Aqua Velva contained 70–80% alcohol, which dried and irritated skin with repeated use. But Aqua Velva's signature ingredient was menthol, a compound derived from mint that created a cooling sensation by activating cold-sensitive nerve receptors. Menthol was generally safe in small amounts, but concentrated menthol in aftershave caused skin irritation, allergic reactions, and contact dermatitis in sensitive individuals. The intense cooling sensation masked the irritation caused by alcohol and other ingredients. Aqua Velva also contained synthetic fragrances, including phthalates used as fixatives and scent enhancers. Phthalates were endocrine disruptors linked to reproductive harm, hormone disruption, and developmental effects. The fragrance formula was proprietary and undisclosed, containing dozens of chemicals that were never tested for long-term safety. Some of these compounds, particularly synthetic musks, bioaccumulated in fatty tissues and persisted in the environment. The product also contained dyes to achieve its distinctive ice blue color. These dyes, often FD&C Blue No. 1 or similar synthetic colorants, served no functional purpose but were added for marketing appeal. Some synthetic dyes were allergens and potential carcinogens, though testing was minimal in the 1960s. Daily use of Aqua Velva meant chronic exposure to alcohol, menthol, phthalates, synthetic musks, and dyes. The aftershave absorbed through freshly shaved skin, where microcuts and irritation increased chemical absorption. Men who used Aqua Velva every day accumulated years of exposure. Family members inhaled the fragrance compounds which volatilized into bathroom air and clung to clothing. The grooming industry marketed Aqua Velva as refreshing and invigorating, emphasizing the cooling sensation and masculine appeal. Advertisements never mentioned chemical exposure, endocrine disruption, or skin irritation. The aftershave that promised to refresh and soothe was actually drying skin, delivering phthalates, and coating faces with synthetic chemicals. The smell meant freshness, confidence, and masculinity, but it meant chemical absorption. The icy blue aftershave was a cocktail of alcohol and endocrine disruptors splashed onto vulnerable skin every morning. Pond's cold cream was the standard for makeup removal and skin care in the 1960s. The thick white cream came in a distinctive round jar and had a mild, slightly waxy smell, a mixture of beeswax, mineral oil, and preservatives. Women applied it generously, massaging it into their faces to dissolve makeup, then wiping it away with tissues. It was gentle, effective, and trusted by generations. Mothers passed the ritual down to daughters. Applying Pond's cold cream was as much a bedtime tradition as brushing teeth. But Pond's cold cream was primarily mineral oil, a petroleum byproduct that coated skin in an occlusive layer. While mineral oil was considered safe, it contained trace impurities and contaminants, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, some of which were carcinogenic. The beeswax was generally safe, but the other ingredients posed concerns. The cream contained emulsifiers to blend the oil and water, often sodium borate, borax, a skin irritant and reproductive toxin. The preservatives, likely parabens or formaldehyde-releasing compounds, prevented bacterial growth but were endocrine disruptors. The fragrance, though mild, contained undisclosed synthetic compounds, phthalates, allergens, and potential irritants. These chemicals were absorbed through facial skin, which is more permeable than other body surfaces. Women who used Pond's cold cream nightly accumulated chronic exposure to mineral oil, borax, parabens, and fragrance compounds. The cream coated pillows and pillowcases, transferring chemicals to faces during sleep. The marketing emphasized Pond's cold cream as a gentle, trusted skincare product used by beautiful women for generations. Advertisements never mentioned petroleum byproducts, reproductive toxins, or endocrine disruptors. The product was assumed safe because it had been used for decades. But traditional didn't mean tested or safe. The ingredients were grandfathered in without rigorous safety testing, and the long-term effects of nightly use were unknown. Women trusted Pond's cold cream to cleanse and protect their skin, unaware they were coating their faces with petroleum derivatives and endocrine disruptors. The cream absorbed into facial skin overnight, delivering chemicals directly into the bloodstream. The mineral oil clogged pores, trapping bacteria and causing breakouts in some users. The borax irritated sensitive skin, causing redness and dermatitis. The cream that promised beauty and skin care was delivering questionable chemicals night after night. The smell meant cleanliness, tradition, and skin care rituals, but it meant chemical exposure. The gentle cream that removed makeup was coating faces with petroleum, reproductive toxins, and endocrine disruptors. The bedtime ritual that promised healthy skin was quietly poisoning the women who trusted it. Cigarette smoke was the most pervasive smell in American homes during the 1960s. Nearly half of all adults smoked, and indoor smoking was not just permitted, it was ubiquitous. Fathers smoked at the dinner table. Mothers lit cigarettes while cooking. Guests smoked in living rooms. Pipes filled dens with sweet aromatic smoke. Cigars were celebratory rituals. The smell of tobacco smoke permeated every surface: curtains, carpets, upholstery, walls, clothing, and hair. Non-smoking family members inhaled second-hand smoke constantly. Children grew up breathing smoke-filled air, their developing lungs saturated with carcinogens and toxins. Tobacco smoke contained over 7,000 chemicals, including at least 70 known carcinogens: benzene, formaldehyde, polonium-210, arsenic, cadmium, and nitrosamines. Second-hand smoke exposure caused lung cancer, heart disease, stroke, and respiratory illnesses in non-smokers. Children exposed to second-hand smoke suffered higher rates of asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia, ear infections, and sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. Pregnant women exposed to smoke had higher risks of miscarriage, stillbirth, low birth weight, and developmental problems in their children. The smoke didn't just affect lungs, it contaminated everything. Third-hand smoke, the residue that settled on surfaces, remained toxic for years. The sticky brown film on walls and ceilings was tobacco tar, loaded with carcinogens. Children crawling on carpets and touching furniture absorbed these chemicals through their skin. The smell that clung to a smoker's clothing and hair was evidence of toxic residue that family members inhaled and absorbed through contact. Despite growing evidence of harm, smoking indoors was socially acceptable and culturally normalized. Ashtrays were decorative household gifts exchanged at weddings and housewarmings. Advertisements portrayed smoking as glamorous, sophisticated, and safe. The tobacco industry denied health risks and funded studies to create doubt. Families who objected to smoking were considered rude or overly sensitive. The smell of cigarette smoke was so common it became invisible, a background odor that people stopped noticing. But every breath in a smoke-filled home delivered carcinogens into lungs. Every surface in a smoker's home was contaminated with toxic residue. Children raised in smoking households accumulated years of exposure before they were old enough to understand the risks. The smell meant normalcy, relaxation, and social acceptance, but it also meant cancer, heart disease, and lung damage. The most ubiquitous smell in 1960s homes was also the deadliest. The smoke that filled every room was killing the people who breathed it, slowly, silently, one cigarette at a time. Conclusion: 30 chemicals defined the smell of American homes, not industrial accidents or environmental disasters, everyday products. Ammonia burned throats while cleaning windows. Bleach created toxic gas in poorly ventilated bathrooms. DDT fogged kitchens to kill flies. Mothballs saturated closets with carcinogens. Lye-based drain cleaners sent caustic fumes through entire houses. Floor wax released neurotoxic solvents every Saturday morning. Aquanet hairspray contained vinyl chloride, a known carcinogen, sprayed directly into the air families breathed. Brylcreem coated pillows with petroleum byproducts. And cigarette smoke, the most pervasive smell of all, filled every room with 70 known carcinogens. These weren't mistakes. They were deliberate consumer products, marketed as safe, necessary, and modern. The smells meant cleanliness, beauty, masculinity, and progress. But they also meant poisoning. Families inhaled, absorbed, and accumulated toxic chemicals daily, trusting manufacturers and regulatory agencies that prioritized profit over safety. What's in your home right now that future generations will look back on in horror? What safe products are you using today that will be banned tomorrow? The smells of 1965 are gone, but the lesson remains. Trust nothing, question everything, and remember that the smell of progress is often the smell of poison.